I introduce Adam Johnson. He's a founder of Garbology, a business disrupting waste management to create a world without waste. It does that by developing a network of niche businesses to extract valuable materials from waste. Currently, Garbology operates, did I say it wrong that time? It's so hard. Currently, Garbology operates a mattress recycling business and a tip/shop. Adam previously held senior management roles in local government in Perth and worked as a consultant and regulator in both Sydney and Melbourne. Please join me in welcoming Adam.
All right, so it's Garbology. Look, I think what Jenny talked about was awesome, isn't it? Like, you get this sense of this massive problem out there, and you know, if you think about it too hard, it does your head in, and you just don't want to get up in the morning. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say how that big problem is actually a whole slew of opportunities. And they're opportunities that aren't for government, really, to pursue. Government will help. They're actually opportunities, is this one? For entrepreneurs, which is kind of fortunate because that's where I position myself at the moment. But to give you a really quick snapshot of what I'm going to say, and usually I will talk for like at least an hour on this stuff, and more if I'm allowed. So I'm going to have to really get my skates on. But the summary is, waste is not a big problem, it's a whole heap of opportunities, and to get to that point, you need entrepreneurs, and you create this world where you've got a whole heap of niches, a whole heap of complexity, and you revel in the complexity of the system. And the whole point is that wastes aren't actually wastes, they're just byproducts that we haven't worked out how to reinsert back into the economy. So, you know, we talk about, when we see this with the C&D waste, it's actually not inert waste, it's sand, it's rubble, it's all of these things that we just haven't quite worked out how to do with it, for whatever reason. Right, I would usually talk about the problem, which I'm not going to do too much here because Jenny's kind of done that for us. But what comes out of that sort of thinking around a big problem is we need a big solution. You know, so we need an incinerator, we need a big landfill, we need a whole heap of landfills, we need a whole heap of materials recovery facilities. And that's all well and good, and it may actually be true as a baseline, but the thinking that goes with that is that it needs to be centrally planned. You know, you need to have infrastructure, you need to have clever people work out the right system, and away you go. I would argue that that's actually precisely the wrong approach to take, because what it does is it creates a system that actually strips out the complexity, and it's in the complexity that the answer actually lies. So if you look at the business that we're in, which is currently mattress recycling, mattresses are somewhere in those tonnes of however many tonnes of C&I waste goes to landfill. Yet you would never know that there's 170,000 mattresses or thereabouts going to landfill every year in Perth alone. And yet, you know, and so once you know that, you think, well, maybe there's an opportunity here. And then you realise each mattress consumes between $50 and $100 each in landfill airspace. And you say, well, now actually there really is an opportunity here. And this is something you can build a business of, and which is what we're doing. But the problem with thinking of waste as a centrally planned thing that needs to be centrally resolved is that not only do you strip out the complexity, you strip out the answers, but if you look at that in terms of how we do with food, if you look at food, we don't say, you know, Perth has 1.7 million people, therefore we need X hectares of wheat, and we're going to give everyone a bag of wheat a week, and that's their food. You know, that's not the way we deal with it. That's an absurd notion. That's a sort of like a Soviet Union notion of a quota production. What we actually do is we have a whole heap of opportunities for entrepreneurs in the food industry to provide the food that people want. And the reason they know that people want it is because they buy it. And it's driven by entrepreneurs, following markets, creating markets, and all that sort of a thing. Waste is exactly the same system, but in reverse. But what we do with waste is that we concentrate it all into the engineers, and I'm an engineer, and we get engineers to solve the problem for us. And the only way you can solve a problem that complex is you simplify it down, and you lose all the answers in that process. So, that's what we do. How do we get from there to the answer? Well, I'm going to say, and hopefully I've got enough time on here before that deadly alarm goes off, but there's 4 elements as far as I would argue. First of all, storytelling. Now, what the hell does storytelling have to do with waste? You know, waste is stuff that's in the bin, it's a horrible thing. What we do with our stories is that we create our world. So if we tell our world ourselves that waste is a problem we need to manage, then we have a problem and we manage it. If we say to ourselves, waste is an opportunity to be exploited, then all of a sudden we shift our thinking and we say, well, actually, maybe that's true. And then you say, what about all these tons of C&D waste? You know, was it 3 million tonnes a year? Yeah, 3 million tonnes a year of C&D waste. Actually, in that, there's about 1 million, I'm guessing, tonnes of concrete, or thereabouts. You know, we can crush that down, we can make a product out of this. There is a business there. And so you start to drill it down into some real solutions. And the reason storytelling works is because we do it in our day-to-day lives anyway. If we tell ourselves that we're generally unhealthy people, like if you tell it to yourself, you will get a cold every year. You tell yourself that you're generally healthy, which I do, then you'll only get a cold once a year. In fact, I don't get colds except for when I do. And so, really the story that we're telling ourselves around waste is that we talk about a world without waste. You know, and the waste professionals in the room would snort and they say, you know, Adam, mate, you are off your rocks. But until you frame it that way, you don't actually come towards a solution. And really, and that solution requires people to be thinking around these million, I keep talking about a million tails, let a million flowers bloom sort of thing. And that's really where you need to start to come to an answer. Then you start to drill down, you say, well, you know, how do we actually make all these things happen? This is a pretty tricky field, it's a pretty complex thing. Waste is obviously a complex problem. Well, you know, we actually are in a really golden time in terms of what we can achieve through our technology. I'm not talking about pyrolysis plants or waste processing plants. I'm talking about how we deal with knowledge, and how we interact with each other, social media, driving this scale, and you know, there's some work being done which talks about scalable learning. And what that's saying is that rather than having silos of knowledge and you go to the expert and the expert gives you an answer, it's about saying, well, actually the knowledge is in flux. Knowledge is continually being developed, especially in something like waste, where we're doing stuff we've never done before. You know, we're taking mattresses and we're recycling. Yeah, that's sort of been done, but you know, what do you do with all of the little bits? Well, you develop that knowledge as you go. And so there's some great work done, and I definitely don't have the time to go into it in detail, but by, it's called The Power of Pull. If you want a book, read The Power of Pull. It's a fantastic book where he contrasts, the authors contrast scalable efficiency, which is, you know, economies of scale, with scalable learning. And the two are actually directly opposed. If you want scalable learning, you don't build a big $50 billion plant. You build little ones and you cobble them together into a network. Which then leads into another book by Nicholas Nassim Taleb called The Anti-Fragile, which you may well have heard. You've probably heard of his book, The Black Swan, something like that. And what he talks about is anti-fragile is making systems that get stronger through change, not weaker. And so typically the best we do is that we hope that they don't get worse, but they just sort of stay the same. It's a pretty average way of planning out the world, given we know change is all around us all the time. So the anti-fragile is saying, well, how about we create systems that get stronger through change? And why does that matter? Well, some of the things he talks about is really critical to what we talk about, which is iterative innovation. So you don't go for the killer punch. You just keep adding on to things. You start out small. You start out with a scale that, you know, if it goes bad, then, you know, it's not a nice thing, but you're not going to go broke. And you know, that's been our model in garbology. But you know, that's really the model that we need to be looking at in waste processing. Rather than going for, we need 3 incinerators for Perth, each 500,000 tonnes each serviced by a rail network. You know, this whole big infrastructure approach. How about we look at, you know, 100 waste processing plants? If one of them goes down, we don't have a crisis. We just have a bit inconvenient. If a 500,000 tonne plant goes down, you have a crisis. You are stuffed. So there's a whole heap of stuff in there that I can't really talk about. I don't have time, and the deadly alarm's going off, and I'm about to be cut off. The next thing I want to talk about is the connection economy. I've kind of touched on this, but really why this matters is it's creating a space for serendipity. And this is a really dippy kind of a thing to talk about in waste. You know, I'm supposed to be an engineer, I'm supposed to be talking about hard science. But really, the way we get to the answers in waste is we do it through serendipity. We create what I keep calling serendipity machines, which is actually a natural segue into some work that we're doing at Garbology coming up in September, which is where we are creating, it's an experiment to be honest, it's a waste social lab. So what we're doing is we're creating a space for people to come together, to kick around ideas for where might the next niche businesses be in waste processing, and then take them through that next step. So we have Katie here from the School for Social Entrepreneurs. It will be dovetailing into that, ideally. So even if we have one new business come out of this, that's a fantastic thing. And how long have I got? A minute, all right. Cool. Because look, I've talked a whole heap of theory, and it's nice to get theory drilled down into reality. So what does it all mean? Like, what we do at Gulpology is we recycle mattresses a few times, and then we've done that for about a year. And we do between 700 and 1,000 a week, mattresses. And that's all well and good, and we get the steel, and most people's instinctive reactions, the steel's worth money, which it's not. Steel as a spring is like we get paid $30 a tonne, and it costs us $200 a tonne to get it to recyclers. So it doesn't make sense like that. But what we do is we get the foam out of the mattresses, which we can bale up and sell on to Dunlop flooring to make carpet underlay. We get coconut matting out of older mattresses, which we're just making a product that we can use in landscape and sell that in retail. Bed bases obviously have a lot of timber in them. The beauty of that is it's all very similar in size. We can then start to design up industrial design furniture, design for mass production, which is again a use of that thing. And it's not about getting rid of the waste, it's about creating an opportunity from that material. And so if you want to see what it actually looks like, just give us a call, come on down, because we're more than happy to show people around what that means for mattress recycling and also for Tip Shop, which is probably outside my minute to go. But it is basically standing the whole thing on its head. And rather than saying, let's get rubbish out of the public and into the ground as quickly as possible, saying, let's actually stop it as many spots as we can before it goes into the ground and add value as many steps as we can along the way. And of course, rubbish is going to go in the ground. But if we can do everything we can do, looking at Susanna because she's about to stand up, we can do everything we can do to add value, then we go from 100% going to landfill to 10% going to landfill, and then we can keep working on that. Thank you.